if you've been around here for a while, you probably already know this. It's not a surprise to you. I'm actually the funniest pastor you know. If you haven't been around here, thanks, Bing. I like how Bing leaves the children unattended to interrupt the adult service. That's why we have Mike. So I don't know if you think I'm funny, but I think I'm funny, and really, honestly, that's all that matters to me. Most of the things that I laugh the hardest at are things that I have said. And I have zero shame in that. I spent a couple of days this week in Chicago with some friends, and it was super nice to just be around people who think that you're funny. Now, my kids are all at an age where they don't think I'm funny. They don't laugh with me. At the very least, they laugh at me, which is okay. That's better than nothing. But so it was just good. It was good to be able to be with friends and laugh and joke around and spend some time. They all think I'm funny, which is good. I think one of the interesting things is, as you experience different parts of life, you have experiences where, like, you're known for a thing in a particular area within a group of people. There are a group of people who know me as somebody who knows how to fix cars, and so they'll text me and ask me questions about auto problems, which, as long as I don't actually have to physically help, is fine. Which I'm a sucker. I'll help. I've changed my phone number. I'm joking. There are a group of people who know me as, I know a lot of stuff about coffee, and that's true. Like, if you had experienced me back in the days where we were running the coffee shop down in Louisville, like, I could talk your ear off about coffee varieties and coffee growing regions and elevation and flavor and processing profiles and all of those kinds of things. And so there are people who experience me that way. Now, there are lots of ways to be known. But not all of the ways for you to be known are ways that you want to be known. Have you ever experienced that? Like, you have a bad first impression, and now a specific person or a group of people have this experience of you, and it's super difficult to shake that. It's super difficult to reshape that viewpoint. Or maybe you have this experience where, like, you go into a space and you don't realize that it's a serious space, and you're being silly in that space, and people are like, well, this guy doesn't take things seriously. And that's like the way that people view you for the rest of their time knowing you. I think there are different ways for us to be known, and the question is that I want to pose for us this morning as we think about this series that we've been in, talking about these habits of community, is how do we as a church want to be known? How do we as a people want to be known? So let's just put a pin in that. We'll come back. We've been talking in this series about a couple of things. First week we talked about just what the process of developing habits are and what the importance are of developing habits. And then we talked a little bit about the first habit, which is the habit of sharing. Sharing is where we take our resources, our knowledge base, our skill set, and we offer it to the community. It's a powerful thing when that happens because, like, I don't know if you know this, but I don't know everything. And some of the things that I don't know about, you do know about. And so, like, that's a really cool feature of what it means to be a part of community. And when we are in the habit of those kinds of things, the habit of sharing those kinds of things, like, it makes all of us better. The next week is, we talked about the habit of living inside out, and that's the habit of being your authentic self in every space that you're in. That's a really important part of community. A part of being together is knowing that the person that you're interacting with on a Sunday morning is the same person that you'll interact with later on in the week. It's also important because vulnerability is an important part of what it means to be in relationship. If you're not being vulnerable with one another, then there's actually no growth in connection, in sharing. The other part of that is that it creates space for people to be able to recognize, hey, you know what? This area in my life, this confession part, this confessing our sin, this confessing of the places where we need help and we need support, it helps us to move past some of those places. So that was week 2. Week 3, we talked about giving ourselves to the greater good. This idea that, like, I don't know if you know this, but I can't do it all by myself. Our team can't do it all by ourselves. And all of this happens because of your involvement, because of you giving back to the community. Because of you giving back to this community, we are able to make a difference in the community that we live in. So this week we're going to be talking about another habit. But before we jump into talking about that habit, I'd just like to look at some verses that Jesus talked about, or this teaching that Jesus talked about. Jesus taught in Luke chapter 6. This is like this biggest chunk of like teaching in the book of Luke. Jesus talks about what it means to live the way of Jesus, the way of following Jesus. This is just after in the book of Luke, he's called his disciples, and this is kind of like the opening statement, address that he gives to these new followers. And he starts out with this. He says, to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on a cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Does anybody remember that part? What do we call that? That little verse at the end there? We call it the golden rule. I think often children hear this, the golden rule, because we talk about this in Sunday schools and in kids' church and stuff like that. We teach them the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. What kids hear is, do what he did to me. And also, interestingly enough, what adults hear is, do what he did to me, to him. It's interesting. It sounds similar. It's a little different in application. He goes on and says, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you are expecting repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend expecting to be repaid in full. It says, love your enemies, do good to them, lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High God. Because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. Opening treatise on what it means to follow Jesus. Jesus starts out the conversation about what it looks like to follow him, and he says, love your enemies. That is a really hard place to start. That is a really hard place to start. Step one, following Jesus. Step one, love your enemies. Have you gotten it? Are you down? Are you down with that one? And then he spends several verses talking about what loving your enemies looks like. He takes this, love your enemies, do it, or go do it. And then he takes it and makes it explicit. He doesn't let you think that you are already doing it. So I think for part of that is if we're going to love our enemies, we got to know how to get there. How do we get to loving your enemies? And so let's just look at maybe a workflow for how to love your enemies, okay? Step one, love one another. You have people, it's really hard to love your enemies when we aren't real good at loving the people who are close to us. Step one, love one another. But how do we love one another? How do we love one another? We've talked about this. We talked about this on week 1. We talked about the idea of sharing. Sharing is a part of how we love one another. And so we love one another sacrificially. We look at the people around us, the people that God has put in our life, and we love them sacrificially. We see the needs that they have, and we're like, oh, I have that resource, and I'm not using it, or I don't need it that bad, or they need it more. However that works. Jesus talks about it this way in John. He says, a new commandment I give you, love one another as I have loved you. How did Jesus love? Sacrificially. He gave up himself. He gave up his position. He gave up his power. He gave up his place for us. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know you are my disciples. If you love the way that if you love one another, if you love everybody, if you love the people that are near you the way that Jesus loves, those outside will know that you're one of the followers of Jesus. So that's step one, love one another sacrificially. Step two, love your neighbor. These are all things that we are really good at making into this, this truth that we can accept. Love your neighbor. Love one another. Love your enemies. Good, got it. But there's a intersection between the idea and the application, and that intersection is in the real world. The real world is where all of this takes place. And how we do this, sociologists tell us that the best way to determine what people actually believe is not what they tell you that they believe, it's what they do. You love God? How do you love God? You love one another? How do you love one another? And like this actually has tangible ways that we do it. So we love our neighbor fully. We love our neighbor fully. Jesus talks about it this way in the book of Mark. He says, in response to what is the greatest commandment, he says this. The most important one, answered Jesus, is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this. Love your neighbor as yourself. Like, how do you love yourself? You make sure that your needs are met. You make sure that you have food and resources. I mean, we're not always all good at this all the time, but like this is the way that Jesus tells us to love our neighbor. Love our neighbor the way that we want to be loved, the way that we are taken care of. And so then that leads us to this last one, which is love your enemy. Everybody ready to go do this after church? Really excited about it? Loving your enemy? Love your enemy with an open hand. Jesus talks about this in this passage that we've been looking at. He says, but to you who are listening, I say this, love your enemies, do good to them. Do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on the cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. With an open hand, with generosity. And generosity isn't just like a financial thing. Generosity is mostly not a financial thing. Generosity is a way of interacting. A generosity has to do with how you choose to view the people around you. Do the people who get under your skin, do you choose? Brené Brown talks about this when she talks about what it means to be resilient. She talks about the sort of people who have emotional resiliency are the kinds of people that willingly choose to believe that the people around them are doing their best. They may not be. They probably aren't. But you choosing to believe that they're doing their best, that they have good intentions, that they're willing, like that's really hard. But if you do that, that changes how you see the world. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. That's how you love your enemy, with an open hand. Like we're really good at that clenching our fists and holding on to what belongs to us thing. Especially when we feel threatened, especially when we feel disconnected or disintegrated. Jesus goes on and says this. If you love those who love you, what credit is it? Like, loving those who love you if you love those who love you, what credit is it that to you? Even sinners do that. He goes on and says in verse 35, he says, but love your enemies, do good to them, lend to them without expecting to get anything back. This whole idea, this idea of loving, it's not a new thing. It's not a new idea. Jesus said this, and we read this earlier. A new command I give you, love one another. Love one another as I have loved you. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples. And that leads us to this habit. This is the habit for this week. To grow in real community, we must develop the habit of loving bravely. All of this that Jesus just spent verses after verses describing is scary stuff. Loving people who are difficult to us, loving people who challenge us, loving people who curse us and mistreat us, that's hard stuff. Sometimes loving the people who are closest to us, that's hard too. Loving your neighbor, that's hard. But for us to grow in community, we have to develop the habit of loving bravely, to taking love to difficult places, to not just love the people who love us. That's what Jesus said. Love bravely. So I think for us to be able to do this, we need to take some time to evaluate. I think for us to know whether or not we're doing this, we need to evaluate. I think one of the realities is that how we as a community are doing when we talk about loving bravely is how you are doing. It's how I am doing when it comes to loving bravely. Because here's the thing, community is an idea that's made up of individuals. And individuals are the ones that are the feet on the ground when it comes to loving. So how we are doing is how you are doing. The level to which we are effectively loving one another, loving our enemies, loving our neighbor is how you are doing or how I am doing when it comes to that. So let's look at it a little bit. So I think for us to figure out how to love our enemies, we have to have a definition, or we have to understand who that is. Who are our enemies? The passage, if we go back, sorry. I thought it was in there. Love your enemies. Do good to those who what? Hate you. Your enemies are the people who hate you. Your enemies are those who curse you. Your enemies are those who mistreat you. See, love is an activity that we do. It's not just an emotion that we have about people. Like, the cool thing about that is that you can love while not liking it. You can love while experiencing difficult things. You can love while being mistreated. You can love in the middle of having anxiety about the whole situation. You can love. So if love is not a static position, it's a moment-to-moment choice that we make and an attitude communicated through our actions, let's take a look at a kind of a metric if we're going to actually evaluate what it means to love, let's look at a metric. And I think the one of the best definitions of what it means to love is in the book of 1 Corinthians. And Paul writes the book of 1 Corinthians in the middle of heated conflict. So like he doesn't write this on a Valentine's card in the middle of nowhere with only warm and fuzzy feelings in his heart. He writes the book of 1 Corinthians in the middle of deep turmoil and conflict and challenge. And he writes, like, the culmination of the entire letter is in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. He has just finished talking about all of the ways that conflict happens and all of the ways, the challenge in relationship. So, like, what I love about this as a definition is it's actually, this definition is not a definition that happens in the context of us trying to figure out, of this warm and fuzzy feeling. It's a definition that works in the middle of deep conflict, which I feel like that's what it means to love enemies. You don't love enemies in the context of peace. So the first question that we would ask ourselves if we are following 1 Corinthians 13, starting in verse 4, and I don't have it up on the scripture, but the first question I have is this: am I being patient with my enemies? Those people who mistreat you, who hate you and curse you, are you being patient with them? Second question: am I being kind to my enemies? Yikes. Following along in 1 Corinthians, do I envy my enemies? Do I see, when good things happen for them, how do I respond? What is my gut level response when good things happen to those people who are currently mistreating me? Do I brag about and defend my achievements in front of my enemies? Do I act like I am better than my enemies? Am I rude to my enemies? Do I want my own good at the expense of my enemies? Whoa. Am I easily angered by my enemies? Do I keep a record of my enemies' wrongs? Do I delight when bad things happen to my enemies? Do I rejoice when my enemies change course for the better? When my enemy asks for forgiveness, do I rejoice? Sometimes we really revel in that conflict. Like if the person that has hurt us turns course, we're like, nope, sorry, no forgiveness for you. Would I be willing to protect my enemies from another person's attack? Would I be willing to trust my enemies? That's hard. I didn't ask, will you trust them? Because sometimes there are pieces of that are more complicated than that. But like, would you be willing? This isn't so much, this you'll notice that these questions really have nothing to do with them. They have to do with us. They have to do with your heart and what's going on in you. Do I hope for my enemy's best? Will I continue to extend love to them even if they don't love me back? Do I believe that this love posture can't fail? That's one of my favorite lines in that whole section. Love never fails. Do we believe that? I'm going to invite Tony back up. What would it look like if we chose this risky, crazy, ridiculous way of loving for how we were known? There's lots of ways that Christians are known in the world right now. Reactive, against everything, anything. What if we chose this ridiculous Jesus thing where we love our enemies? Is it going to bite us in the rear? Probably. Are people going to take advantage of it? Yes. Is it what Jesus demonstrated? Also, yes. What would happen in our community if we were known as the most forgiving church in Longmont? As the most loving church in Longmont? I mean, I don't know that would necessarily grow us to where we have to buy a new building. But how would that change if that's how we were known? I think the passage from John tells us if that's how we were known, they would know we were Jesus' followers. So my challenge for us today is to maybe take a little bit of a self-inventory. As we went through those lists of questions, did you feel the friction? Did you feel the tension? Were there places in your heart that were kind of moved? What are you going to do about it? How are you going to respond? Here's the thing. If all you do is think about it, then you have not responded. This is not something that can happen inside of your head. Because love doesn't happen inside of your head. Love happens out in the world.